you are. Hey, Sam, how are you?
I'm doing well. Peace and blessings. Peace and blessings, Denise.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure before we get started, any reaction to what you heard from Bruce's story?
I, like I told Mr. Johnson earlier before the show started, it was just an honor and pleasure. Being as somebody who grew up in D.C., watched them on TV with my parents throughout my childhood and adolescence. It was just an honor hearing the backstory, and it took me back to periods of my life that I didn't quite understand. The Berry administration, crack cocaine epidemic, so forth and so on. So just really getting that backstory, and even hearing, I saw similarities in his story and my story coming up through the industry. So it was quite an honor hearing that, and just getting some reaffirmation that I'm on the right path.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. So, speaking of path, though, Sam, first of all, how did you find time to write this book?
Definitely, Babylon Be Still. It's a work that's a decade in the making. So a lot of what I wrote over the course of 10 years. But since 2018, I found time just compilating those works and really writing additional chapters that weaved all of them together to explain how those entries chronicled my political and cultural and spiritual growth as a journalist and educator.
We are proud to have you as an education writer for the Informer. We know that you're also a former school teacher, but culture, like you said, in politics, plays strong roles in your life and in your career. And so, the African-centered part of that. Talk about where that came from and what African consciousness or Pan-African consciousness means to you, and how you want to use your journalism to communicate that.
Definitely. I would say, growing up in DC, it's always been Chocolate City, and I've had to reconcile different aspects of my personality and who in my background. I'm a first generation Washingtonian. My parents immigrated from Liberia in the 1980s, so there was always that coming up, being othered by people of African descent who've been here for generations, which is totally fine. And then going to GW, there were class differences. A lot of my peers came from boarding schools and private schools. I came from DCPS, so there was that. And even just during my adolescence, hopping off the porch, my younger brother and I walking up and down the street, meeting different people. We had to reconcile, those parts of our identity between the schoolhouse and the streets, and so just anything that a teenage, boy goes through. So, by the time that I reached 23, 24, my personality was splintered, and that really affected my journalism path because I didn't quite know who I was. And that really affected how I went into the newsroom, in various newsrooms, attempting to pitch stories about the Black experience. I knew that I wanted to write about Black people, but I didn't have enough confidence at the time to hold my own and to explain why it was important to write about Black people. And once I found Pan-Africanism, I understood that that was the alignment, that was the overall umbrella under which all of my personalities or aspects of my personality could fall. Because Pan Africanists, we believe in Pan African universalism. That is what the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey talked about. And even if you go into the 1960s, when Malcolm X left the Nation of Islam and became more global in his consciousness, he often spoke about putting your religion in the closet. And he aspired to unite with civil rights leaders and other leaders on the African continent along the lines of African identity. So I say all of that to say that in expanding my consciousness, right, and in taking myself outside of the United States and internationalizing myself, I got a global worldview where I could identify with my brothers and sisters here and my brothers and sisters on the continent. And I no longer saw myself through the eyes of white media magnets. I saw myself through the prisms of Africans who have been here long before 1776, 1619, so forth and so on.
It's interesting because Bruce sort of tells the same story, but from a different perspective. But what he had to fight through in the newsroom, to get those white editors or directors or whoever he was, having to work with, to try to see things through his lens and through the lens of the people that he was covering, which was difficult. But
Exactly.
he pursued and persevered. Sounds like you're doing the same thing. We're glad you're here with us because whether we call it Pan-Africanism or not, we adopt the same type of cultural identity. And Black History Month, we're going to talk to Dr. Delaney in a little bit and segue into that. But so tell us just one or two highlights of the book.
Definitely. Wow. I got a couple of highlights. One highlight of the book speaks about how I left the Democratic Party. I left the Democratic Party um, a couple of years into President Obama's second term, and I used that experience to speak about why I didn't vote for the Democratic ticket during the 2016 election. It was a highly contentious election. It was the election that brought us President Donald Trump, and I kept telling people, I'm not voting for a Democrat. Don't hand me Hillary Clinton. Don't hand me Bernie Sanders. And I pretty much explained how Black people's allegiance to the Democratic Party is based in um, a lack of knowledge of self and a lack of knowledge about what we can do on our own as far as politically and holistically. That's one chapter that I thought, from the reactions when it was initially released, was very controversial.
Mm-hmm.
Another chapter in the book highlights what I call grassroots journalism. So it really speaks to the ethos of a grassroots journalist, somebody like myself who writes about the Black experience, but adds enough context to not only humanize Black people, but pretty much give a call to Pan-African self-determination.
I know the problem. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, please.
No, I was going to say, I know that, in coming up, and like you said, you watch Bruce Johnson on television, but what is it that made you decide to become a journalist? And what do you feel as though your role or responsibility is as a journalist?
My father saw something in me. I was always a writer. I could always put words on paper. And my father encouraged me in the 8th grade to join the school newspaper. And I didn't know I'm at that point that I had a flair for journalism, but the paper was pretty small and I had a chance to be editor in chief. And just over the years, as I became more interested in writing and really reflecting on my experiences as a teenager, I just knew that I wanted to be a journalist. And it just came naturally to me, really being curious about the human experience and being very curious about history and how those things intersect, because everything is circular. We see everything really returning in increments of 30 years. And we see that a lot of what's happening in the present is indicative of what happened in the past. So by the time that I graduated high school, I knew that I wanted to go to GW and into my professional realm, writing for Black people and writing about Black people, because by that time, I had gotten a scholarship to GW after what was pretty much a pretty interesting 4 years. Like once again, hopping off the porch, understanding myself through the prism of the Black male experience in DC, navigating adolescence and trying to study at the same time. I knew that there were similar problems and issues that people wanted to articulate, and I wanted to bring all of that into journalism. That's what really inspired me, really giving people a voice.
Sam, how can people get a copy of your book?
Please visit alleyesondc.com. There's a link on the website there to get the book. The book will also be available at Sankofa Video Books and Cafe within the next couple of weeks.
Wonderful. And that's alleyesondc.com.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful. All right. That's fantastic. Well, I am so proud of you. Just like Bruce, I know that there are more books coming out, more stories to tell, and you do a great job in talking about education in the city and really kind of digging down on some of the issues that our Black children are dealing with as they sort of go through the school system here, the pros and the good and the bad. I think you try to keep a balance there.
Definitely.
So I thank you so much for being with us. Keep up the work and look forward to reading more from Sam P.K. Collins.
Give thanks. I appreciate it, Denise. Much love.
All righty. Have a good afternoon.